I am so tired of this election cycle. I debated not doing this at all this morning, to be perfectly honest with you. But I feel like, in many respects, that this is perhaps the decision that we make as a nation on Tuesday is going to be one of the most important decisions that the nation has made in my lifetime as far as the direction that we will go. Because the platforms, the direction that the parties want to go are so vastly different. And so this morning what I want to do is I want to look a little bit at the history of our nation, how we are a Christian nation and how we got to be that way. I want to encourage you to vote, and then I want to encourage you to vote your values. And that's kind of a summary of everything that I'm going to share with you this morning. But I want to begin by turning to Proverbs 29:2, where it says this: "When the godly are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked are in power, they groan." In America, for the godly to be in authority, we have to vote for them. That's pretty simple. Elections are a basic part of how our government works. In fact, government is one of the three institutions God established, along with the family and the church. Paul states in Romans 13:1, "Obey the government, for God is the one who put it there. All governments have been placed in power by God, so that those who refuse to obey the laws of the land are refusing to obey God, and punishment will follow." Now, I want to remind you that when the Apostle Paul wrote Romans, there was no free elected government for the Jewish people or for people in general. They were under the yoke of Rome, and they were ruled by Caesar, and Caesar did pretty much what Caesar wanted to do. And yet Paul says here that government was established by God and that God expects us to obey government as long as it does not violate God's law. Now, that, brings to mind all of the things that have happened this past summer out in Washington and Oregon and these other places. Clearly don't align with what Paul has encouraged us to do here in Romans, has it? Here's a question. Since God established the institution of government, would he tell his people to stay out of it? No. God expects us to get involved, make a positive impact, and to lead the way to real and lasting change, just as Christians have done since the settlement and the founding of this nation. So that brings me to my first point, the Christian founding and shaping of our nation. The Christian founding and shaping of our nation. We are not where we are by accident. Did you know that the first representative assembly in America convened in the church at Jamestown in 1619 to establish one equal and uniform government over all Virginia, which would provide just laws for the happy guiding and governing of the people there inhabiting? When the Pilgrims came 1 year later in 1620, they were blown off course and they didn't make it to Virginia, where they would be governed by the King's Charter. So they decided to draw up their own self-governing document, the first created in America, and it was called, does anybody remember? The Mayflower Compact. It begins in the name of God and gave this reason for their coming: for the glory of God and the advancement of Christian faith. They put that right in the Mayflower Compact as the reason that they came to America, was for the glory of God and for the advancement of the Christian faith. The very first self-governing document in America. We're talking about the positive influence of Christians on American culture and government. You may know that Connecticut is called the Constitution State because the first constitution in America was enacted in 1639 called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. But did you know that that Constitution was based upon Pastor Thomas Hooker's sermon on Deuteronomy 1:13? Did you know that it was the first education law was passed in Massachusetts in 1641 for the purpose of ensuring that children would be able to read and understand Scripture? Did you know that the first university in America, Harvard, was named after Reverend John Harvard, or that it was founded to train ministers, and that for over 150 years it was distinctly Christian in its mission? It started as a Bible college. Did you know that the first hospitals in America were founded mostly by Christians? That it was the Quakers in Pennsylvania and Puritan ministers in New England who led the fight against slavery in America? Did you know that 93% of our founding fathers who voted for the Declaration of Independence and crafted our Constitution were professing Orthodox Christians? And that even the handful who are not Orthodox Christians, each one respected biblical morality as the basis for our laws, and valued public religion for maintaining order and civility. In fact, President George Washington said that the twin pillars essential for supporting a successful society are morality and religion. What kind of religion? Was it just any kind? John Adams, our second president, clarified that when he declared that the general principles on which the fathers achieved independence were the general principles of Christianity. Again, we're talking about Christian founding, molding, and shaping of America. Did you know that our form of government reflects biblical principle? In fact, representative government is based upon Exodus 18:21, which says, "But choose some capable men from among the people, men who respect God, who can be trusted, and who will not change their decisions for money. Make these men officers of the people to rule over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens." Our system of checks and balances between the branches of government is also based on the doctrine of the sinfulness of man, that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. In fact, the three branches of government actually come from Isaiah 33:22, where it says, "For the Lord is our judge," the judicial branch. "The Lord is our lawgiver," the legislative branch. "And the Lord is our king," the executive branch. It is he who will save us. So when you look back, you find that Christians have been involved in the founding and the shaping of American culture and government. And it's the devil's lie that we believe when we conclude, well, there's a separation between church and state, so we ought not get involved in politics. Well, nobody wants a national tax supported church state, and nobody wants the state to control the churches, which is what the First Amendment refers to. But does that mean that God and government are to stay separate? Well, that's not what the founders believed or practiced. Does that mean that there's to be no influence from Christians on the culture or government? Well, Jesus said in Matthew 5:13 through 16, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? You are no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under the feet by men. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. Does that sound like Jesus expected us to put our heads down and just ignore everything that's going on around us? Or that he expected us to make a difference in the world that we are in? My wife is an excellent cook. She is awesome. And I never have to season my food. She does a great job. But I remember in college that there was a lot of times that I was reaching for the salt because it was not so good. And a little bit of salt can make a huge difference. Salt has so many uses. Not only does it make our food taste great, it is a preservative. It melts the ice out on the sidewalk. It's good for a lot of different things. And Jesus refers to Christian people as the salt of the earth. We're to make that difference. We're to preserve our society. We're to make it better from us being there. But we can't do that if we don't involve ourselves in the things that are going on around us. Is there any area of reality where we're supposed to withhold our positive influence and witness? No. We need to bring our Christian faith and our values to bear on our culture and our government, just as Christian people have done from the very, very beginning. That brings me to my second point this morning, Christians voting in America. Again, one of the basic ways that we can have a positive influence is to vote. Think about it. When we vote, we help determine who will lead our nation, make our laws, protect our freedoms. So voting is a simple act with a significant impact. Founding Father Samuel Adams said, "Let each citizen remember, at the moment he is offering his vote, that he is executing one of the most solemn trusts in human society, for which he is accountable to both God and his country." Many of the founding fathers considered voting as a sacred responsibility. It's a privilege, a freedom, an opportunity that millions in other parts of the world can only dream about. Yet many Americans strangely choose not to vote. Less than half of those who are eligible to vote actually do so in any given election. In fact, out of the 60+ million evangelical Christians in America, nearly half failed to vote in the 2004 election. I find that interesting. In America, we have an opportunity to choose who will lead us for the next 4 years. And I always remember, people around me saying, if you didn't vote, then you really have no right to complain about the way things are going. I want to encourage, you to vote. Even if you don't vote the way I think you should vote, I want to encourage you to vote. I want you to be involved in a part of this process in which we choose who will lead us for the next 4 years. Again, I feel like, the stances that each of these guys, the two main guys that are running here, they are going in such totally different directions. And I think it's important that we say what we align with, that we make a decision, that we choose who we're going to vote for. In Paul's day, you didn't get to vote for who was going to be Caesar. You didn't get that choice. And yet, Paul said that God expects us to obey our government. Isn't it much better when the government aligns with what we believe biblically, with God's word? I want to bring up one other thing here, and that is this. There are, based off of which party that you are affiliated with, there are two ways that they look at the Constitution. And I think that was interesting that was brought out in this very last confirmation by Amy Coney Barrett, who is just confirmed to the Supreme Court. Because if you saw any of that, which you may or may not have seen, you saw that she was a constitutionalist. And what that means simply is this. Amy Coney Barrett believes that she is to interpret the Constitution the way that it was written. Does that make sense? So, in other words, that the Founding Fathers had specific things in mind when they penned those words, and that those words affect us today just like they affected those people then. The other camp says that no, the Constitution is a living, breathing argument. And that what the Founding Fathers said, 200 years ago does not necessarily reflect how our society should operate or be governed today. And so what you will see is that a judge that is not a constitutionalist will say, no, our job is to interpret the Constitution as it pertains to society today. The problem with that is that suddenly the rights that you have under the Constitution can suddenly be wiped out with the stroke of a judicial pen. It doesn't really matter anymore. And so your right to free speech could suddenly be gone tomorrow. Your right to due process in a trial could be gone tomorrow if some judge determines that that no longer applies to our society today and it is irrelevant what was written in the Constitution 200 years ago. That's why those things matter. And the people that we choose who make those confirmations matter because they put those people in office. That's why it's so tremendously important that we vote. Obviously Christian rulers would have Christian values, right? Not necessarily. There are a lot of folks who use Christian lingo, but when you look at their positions and votes and their associations, it becomes evident that they do not line up with biblical values. That's why it's so important to do your homework on candidates. Don't just listen to their campaign rhetoric. Look at their records in office. Don't just watch their political ads. Look at the positions on the issues. Think about this. Every candidate has his or her own set of values and positions on important issues. Don't you think that where a candidate stands on moral issues is far more important than the party that he or she belongs to, or the campaign ads and the promises? Shouldn't we vote for candidates who share our moral values? Melanie likes to watch this. We just have Amish TV. We just have an antenna, right? And so we get... They have no electricity. Yeah, I know. And so we get this one set of channels from the internet. It's called Philo. And they have been running these ads over and over and over and over and over against Charlie McClintock, which you may or may not realize is from Alburnett and is running for office. One of the things that's really showed me is that probably the majority of political ads are mostly completely hogwash because they say things that probably even the candidate doesn't really espouse. The person that they're talking against doesn't really espouse. They twist their words. Like Charlie McClintock, for example, has never ever served other than mayor of Alburnett. He's never served in the Iowa, government system. How could he possibly be doing all of these things that they're claiming of him when he's never even had an opportunity to ever vote for anything in Des Moines? You see what I'm saying? And so, I feel like a lot of these ads are just designed to try and sway you, but they're very light on truth, regardless of who they are. That, I don't have a lot of faith in any of the ads that I see on television. And that's why I think it's important that we understand what their real positions are. So, as we look at that, we don't just need to vote. We need to vote our values. We need to vote our values. Don't just vote for voting's sake. Take it one step further and vote your values. Unfortunately, many believers don't even consider their Christian values when they're voting, often choosing candidates whose positions are at odds with their own beliefs, convictions, and values. A study from the Pew Forum on the religion and public life a few years ago showed that 62% of Americans say that their faith has little to do with their voting decisions. That's tragic because Jesus expects us to influence every part of our culture and society as salt and light, including the democratic process. Founding Father John Jay was appointed by George Washington as the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And Jay said, "It is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers." So it's important that we look at the candidates and what their positions are when we get ready to vote. Let me say this. In this particular given election cycle, neither candidate gives you a whole lot to be excited about, in my opinion. There's a lot of people who do not care for Donald Trump's personality. They feel like he says things that he shouldn't say. They feel like if he kept his mouth shut, he'd probably be a lot more popular than he is. And there are a lot of people that, just don't care for the man, Donald Trump. You look at the other candidate, Joe Biden, and we have this guy who really is not making a stand for any platform at all. He's basically saying, vote for me because Donald Trump's a bum. And that's pretty much been his entire position, that and the position that Donald Trump is responsible for all of the COVID stuff. What I am saying is that I don't think either candidate, from a personality standpoint, it has a tremendous amount of appeal. I think that what we should be looking at is what these candidates stand for. That when we consider what we're going to vote for, that we should be voting platform instead of just considering personality. What is it that these guys stand for, and how does their platform compare to what my convictions are as a Christian? Does that make sense? So this morning, I just want to give you 3 things to consider as you are getting ready to make your choice. 3 values that I think that we as Christians should consider as we try to determine who it is that we should vote for. The first is the value of human life. The value of human life. Life is precious, miraculous, and sacred, created by a loving God who makes every being unique. King David prayed in Psalm 139, 15 through 16, "You watched me as I was being formed in utter seclusion. As I was woven together in the dark of the womb, you saw me before I was born. Every day of my life was recorded in your book, every moment laid out before a single day had passed." Is that not an amazing scripture? A scripture that says that God knew us while we were still being formed in our mother, and knew what every single day of our life was going to be before we ever lived one of them. And yet God still loves us enough that he sent his son to die for us. That's amazing, isn't it? God is the author and the artist of human life. Made in the image of God is also a fundamental human right. According to the Declaration of Independence, all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The order is significant. Life is the first God-given right of every human being. If you don't have life, you certainly can't enjoy liberty or pursue happiness. Unfortunately, our God-given right to life in America has been undermined in our culture of death. Every day in America, more innocent human beings are put to death than those who died in the 9/11 attacks. Abortion ends the lives of more than 1.3 million unborn children in America every single year. Nearly 25% of all pregnancies end in abortion. And the overwhelming majority of those innocent children are simply sacrificed on the altar of convenience. Nearly 50 million babies and counting have been killed by abortion. You know, when we ended World War II and we found the concentration camps, we were rightly appalled by what we saw. I remember Craig Titler's dad was talking, Bob, and he said that when they liberated this concentration camp, they forced the nearby village to march through the camp so that they could not deny the atrocities that had happened just over the hill. The difference is with abortion, we never see the bodies. And so it's easy for us to ignore what's going on there. And in some ways, we are like the Germans in the village next door who just pretended that nothing is going on. Nothing is happening. There's nothing to see here. God said it would be better for a person to have a millstone. So that's like this giant rock that you like grind out your wheat on, right? It would be better to have a millstone put around your neck and to be cast into the sea than to cause a child to stumble. If that is true, then how does God feel about 50 million abortions? It should hurt our heart. Because I guarantee you it hurts God's. How do we value life? You know, the thing is this. If we don't value our unborn, the next thing that we will not value are our older people. And I'm getting to be one. And the next thing that could very well happen is, well, you can't contribute to society anymore. We can't afford to continue to, pay for you. So when you hit, whatever, your 80th birthday, we'll throw a birthday party for you, and then we'll give you a shot and celebrate your life, and it'll be over. That could happen. If we don't value our unborn, then who's to say that we'll value our aged citizens? At what point do we say life's not important? So do you value life? Secondly, the value of traditional family. Oh my goodness. Marriage between one man and woman is essential. Basic, necessary. The family is the basic building block of society and the first institution created by God. In Genesis 1:27, it says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it.'" The two genders were meant to complete each other physically, emotionally, and in every other way. In Genesis 2:24, God further declares, he says, "Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." God's intention was for the man and the woman to complete each other. And, when God created, he gave Adam the job of naming all of the animals. And he saw the male lions and the female lions and the male giraffes and the female giraffes and all of the animals that were paired together. And he realized that he had no mate. I believe God did that on purpose so that he would realize what was missing, so that he would appreciate it that much more when God gave it to him. we are different. And I don't mean just the physical differences. We think differently. We respond differently. We approach problems differently. I am not a multitasker. I do one thing, I pursue it until I either drive it to the ground or I, get tired of it, and then I move on to the next thing. It drives my wife crazy, right? I'm not a good multitasker. It's a good thing that my wife is, or the household would fall apart. And that's true of a lot of other homes. The way that we approach things is differently. And you will even hear it in the way that we talk. So, guys tend to be analytical. Women come to them, and my wife will come to me, she'll want to discuss her problems, and she'll get about half a sentence out, and I'm trying to figure out how to fix it, right? And sometimes she doesn't want it to be fixed. She just wants me to listen. But my nature is to fix it, right? So I'm not really listening. I'm already trying to figure out how to fix this thing, and I'm not meeting her need because she's wanting somebody to listen to her, to affirm her, right? And even like how we talk. So like guys will say, "What do you think about this?" But women will a lot of times say, instead of "what do you think about this," they'll say, "How do you feel about that?" How do you feel about that? It's because they're coming from a different perspective. And those perspectives work together to give us one complete person. Does that mean that you can never be complete if you're not married? I don't think so. The Apostle Paul was not married for the vast majority of his life. We don't know about the early parts of that. But I do think in a lot of cases it is harder when you are by yourself. I don't want to make single people sound like second-class citizens, because they're not, right? But I do think it's harder when you don't have somebody to help lean on. I have seen older couples that, they compensate for each other. So I mentioned Bob and Craig's dad, Bob Titler, and his wife, Virginia. The two of them, as they got older, kind of made one good person. So Bob's mind was really good, but he just couldn't hardly get around. Virginia got pretty scattered there toward the end, but her body was good. And so they would get into the car, Virginia would drive, and Bob would tell her where to go. The two of them together kind of made one pretty good person, and I think that's probably where Melanie and I are going to be when we get there toward the end of our life as well. So it's easier. It's easier when you're together, but it doesn't mean that you're any less of a person if there's just one of you, right? But God's intention was for one man and one woman, and that they would be the head of the family. When you have a family, you need both the mom and the dad. And they offer very different perspectives and give you a well-rounded upbringing. Right? So it's the mom that, I shouldn't say that, but typically it's the mom that does the nurturing. It's the dad that does the, teaches you how to ride the bike and to, plays the baseball with you and football and that kind of, right? I mean, I think I'm going to get myself into a lot of trouble, probably. We look at this last summer, the Black Lives Matter stuff, and a lot of the injustice that people and just the outrage and stuff that's going on. And I would say that probably a significant part of this issue relates to that in black communities, there is much less of a father figure influence statistically. statistically, there's much less of a father figure influence in black communities, and I think that that is a big part of what we're seeing played out. Because God intended for there to be both a father and a mother when it comes to raising our families. And when one of them is missing, you're trying to do it with only half the tools in your tool belt, with half the tools in your toolbox. And so this family issue, I think, is tremendously important. And where do we stand on that? Is marriage just any two people that want to be together? Or is marriage, the way that God says it is, between a man and a wife? Will that affect the way that I'm going to vote? I think it should. And then finally, the third one is the value of religious freedom. The value of religious freedom. Freedom is inspiring, liberating, and is priceless. In Galatians 5:1 it says, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." Freedom is guarded, protected, defended. True freedom only comes at a great cost, price, and sacrifice. And today, and that is not only true spiritually, with the death of Christ to set us free from slavery to sin, but also true nationally. We're engaged in a war that has our religious freedom at the very core of it. We have labeled anybody that disagrees with what is politically correct today as someone who is spouting hate speech. If we don't disagree, it doesn't mean that we hate them. It just means that we disagree with them. But it could very easily come to the place where if I would choose to stand by my moral principles and say, for example, that I will not perform a marriage between two women or two men, that I could, be thrown in jail for that, for hate speech. Where is religious freedom if we don't protect it? It'll be gone. And what you will see, the very first thing that will happen is that they will take away any church that does not toe the line. They'll take away their tax exempt status. And then once that is done, then they'll pursue more rigorous and more difficult or more painful things. And so I think it's important that we look at, candidates who will support maintaining the religious freedom that we have. Our nation was founded on it. We went through all of that stuff at the beginning of my message about how America was founded on religious freedom. We dare not just let them take it away. I'm out of time. I've got to go. Our invitation hymn this morning. I want to end with this one last quote here from the very last slide there, Shelley, from the First Amendment, where it says, "Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. What that says in the Constitution is that government will do nothing to either, favor or disfavor your ability to worship. That's what that's actually saying. And if we choose that we want a bunch of non-constitutional judges, that could be wiped out just like that. It could be gone because they say that just doesn't apply to us anymore. So my encouragement for you is to vote. Please vote. Regardless of who you vote for, please vote. And then please vote your values.